look at some of the correspondence that I'd had with Louise over those last years about this book project and about the way she thought about literature and especially about William Faulkner. And so I'll put together some things and hope that, I know that you all know Faulkner. I'm hoping that some of this will be enlightening and that you will recognize her voice and the things of her words that I will remember, because those of us who did know her and who studied under her know that it was indeed unforgettable. And I still miss her, as I'm sure you all do as well. So my notes go back as far as spring 2011 in May. And this was some 4 years before she passed away in 2015. And this is what she says. I've been thinking about the Faulkner book subconsciously for some time now, and the thing that made me realize that I couldn't do it is my impaired eyesight. Now, those of us who know Louise know that her eyesight was always impaired, right? You know, but it did get noticeably worse in the last years of her life. And she did remarkably well in compensating for that. She said, I wouldn't be able to do the secondary scholarship. You keep up with things, she told me. Yeah, right. As well as knowing and thinking about Faulkner constantly. That's more accurate. So between us, we should be able to produce a book that does some justice to what our praise for him should be in our time. And her praise of him was unmistakable. I mean, you know, her estimate of Faulkner was absolutely unique, as in my knowledge, among scholars, especially the scholars writing about Faulkner today. So this is what she says. A possible title is this: Faulkner's Prophetic Mind. Books to be dealt with: Light in August, Go Down Moses, The Unvanquished, The Mansion, The Reivers. More than anyone else in his time, this is Louise, Faulkner discerned the dying of an old age. In many of his novels, it was not only the Old South that was moribund, but Western civilization itself. In The Sound and the Fury, As I Lay Dying, Sanctuary, Requiem for a Nun, Absalom, Absalom, The Hamlet, and The Town, there was a sense of what his character Ratliff was to call the end of an area. That's Ratliff. Beginning with Light in August in 1932, however, Faulkner's tone changed. There followed Go Down Moses, The Unvanquished, The Town, The Mansion, and The Reivers. And we know that Absalom was in there too in 1936, but she mentions just these particular ones, and The Reivers, all of which manifested the hope that he had expressed in his 1950 Nobel Prize address, that man would endure and prevail. And even in this email to me, she stopped to have a long paragraph from, because she loved that Nobel Prize speech. And so she wanted, I guess, to say it for herself and also to remind me of it. And it goes like this, as you'll recognize. I decline to accept the end of man, and that's what Louise was emphasizing. I decline to accept. It is easy enough to say that man is immortal simply because he will endure. That when the last ding-dong of doom has clanged and faded from the last worthless rock, hanging tideless in the last red and dying evening, that even then there will still be one more sound, that of his puny, inexhaustible voice, still talking. I refuse to accept this. I believe that man will not merely endure, he will prevail. He is immortal, not because he alone among creatures has an inexhaustible voice, but because he has a soul, a spirit capable of compassion and sacrifice and endurance. The poet's, the writer's duty is to write about these things. It is his privilege to help man endure by lifting his heart, by reminding him of the courage and honor and hope and pride and compassion and pity and sacrifice which have been the glory of his past. The poet's voice need not merely be the record of man. It can be one of the props, the pillars to help him endure and prevail. Back to Louise. He wrote the speech hastily, we're told, scribbling it down after he was already in Stockholm and delivering it at the banquet in an inaudible voice. It galvanized not only the world, however, but his own writing. The Nobel Prize was a turning point for him, and it would be interesting to speculate about the reason for so radical a change. Whether it was a recognition of the duty of the writer, as he stated, or the sudden awareness that his own work could have worldwide importance, or simply the gradual turn of the major author from tragedy to comedy, it is hard to say. But for whatever reason, the responsibility of the writer descended upon him, and thereafter his work looked more deeply into the resilience of the human person, finding in it with increasing certainty endurance and hope rather than decline and despair. In the process, his latent comic talent blossomed. The dark ironies of Jason Compson found an entire community in the Snopeses. The implicit hopeful aura surrounding Vardaman Bundren turned into an Isaac McCaslin, and finally a Lucius Priest. So you can see those progressions that she's tracking through there. I've sent you a tentative outline, she writes me. Now here's another one, and this is the way she would do. She'd give me one thing and I'd start working on it, and then she'd say 2 weeks later, here's another outline. Let's think about this. Here's another one that might be more possible. As we know, his attitude toward woman was extremely positive. He understood the meaning of a Helen for society. I've already published an article on Faulkner's Virgin, she says, in a book done by the Institute on the idea of the Virgin, Images of the Untouched. I deal quite a bit with Faulkner's first two novels in this light, so we wouldn't have to go into them any further. If we took this topic, our assumption would be that we can't have a true civilization without feminine beauty. In parentheses, she writes, Helen. And Faulkner was extremely conscious of the danger of our having lost the ability to honor that beauty. Here is what the outline could be. Faulkner was preoccupied with the meaning of the daughter, as was Shakespeare. The departure of Caddy is an irreparable loss to the West. Note the photograph of her with the Nazis in an appendix that he added to The Sound and the Fury some 16 years later. The daughter is defiled in Sanctuary and in As I Lay Dying. She is betrayed in the Hamlet. There begins to be hope for her in Light in August, and she is carefully cultivated in the Snopes trilogy. Finally, she works our cultural salvation. My article about Faulkner's Virgins, this is still Louise, pays quite a bit of attention to the two early novels as setting the pattern, and she's talking about their Soldier's Pay and Mosquitoes. But this figure is preeminent in the Snopes trilogy and in the final novel, The Reavers. Should we go on with this topic? The daughter is cultural beauty and the source of chivalry, or with the larger one, of Faulkner's dawning prophecy concerning the West. So there she had those two topics for a book, and then she ends this email by saying, or possibly combining the two, like this, and then she gives me an outline of that pretty much takes in, all those works, and focusing on Go Down Moses and the Keats quote that Cass Edmonds gives to Isaac, right? Forever wilt thou love and she be fair. And then after that, Isaac said, well, he was talking about a girl. And Cass says, well, he had to talk about something. I think we agree, she says to me, on Faulkner, enough on Faulkner that we could pull this off. I'm eager to get started. What are your reactions to the outline above? We're going to have to be honest with each other if we do this. Then Claudia and I will have to get busy on the book on education. And I left that in there because that's Claudia McMillan, Dr. Claudia McMillan, who also studied under Louise, and Louise directed her dissertation. So this is another one of her projects, that they were going to write a book on teaching and education, and Louise came up with the title called Beyond Measure, which of course alluded to testing, but also way beyond that. Well, I'm a little bit chagrined to say that Claudia has finished her manuscript, and she's in the revision process now, so she's way ahead of me. Okay, so then that was in May. On June 1st, then I got this. Here's the beginning of yet another book I was planning to write on Faulkner, until I began to realize that my site would keep me from doing the research in contemporary scholarship that Faulkner books apparently demand. I could do that part, she said, But nobody has written about, everybody has failed to see, nobody has valued his prophetic powers. And I had never thought of that either. Maybe we can talk about that some. In this fragment, saved out of all my beginnings, I intended to emphasize his amorous and she put that in quote marks, as amorous universe. I've never connected that word with Faulkner's universe. And, so if Baynard were here, he could tell you about the many computers and hard drives and flash drives that had fragments of her thinking and writing, about it, and they've never been gathered together. They're still there. That's going to be quite a work for somebody. But this is what she found among those. In his 19 novels written in 33 years, 1929 to 62, William Faulkner bequeathed to his fellow men and women a treasure trove as rich as that of Shakespeare or Homer. I gotta take that in, right? Claiming that for Faulkner. And she was always unabashed about that. For it became his destiny, as it was theirs, to stand at the end of one age and to intuit the outlines of another. It became increasingly obvious as he neared the completion of his task that he was conscious of his mission. That is, to get it all down like the Old Testament on the head of a pen. Faulkner knew that an age was coming to an end, not just a century, not just a millennium, but an age. And like Isaac McCaslin in The Bear, he would not grieve, but would simply be proud to witness the mammoth event. This secret knowledge that one of the world's great epochs was ending gave his work a powerful pathos unmatched by any writer in modernity. His loving regard extended from Yoknapatawpha County on out to the entire nation, the mysterious and fecund earth, and the cosmos at large. Fully aware of the complications of good and evil, he took joy in the accurate and loving depiction of both. As Keats wrote of Shakespeare, quote, he must have taken as much joy in an Iago as in an Imogen. So Faulkner took joy in Flem Snopes and his kindred, in Eula Varner, Gavin Stevens, and above all, his surrogate self, V.K. Ratliff. As the lowest of the low, Mink Snopes was to discover the old earth that seemed so inimical was in reality loving and receptive, hence amorous, that word amorous, so that it welcomed even a derelict Snopes among the long human recording of, quote, Helen and the Bishops, the scornful and graceless seraphim. And then she asked, can any of this be used? Well, yes, of course. So there must have been hundreds of such beginnings lost with old computers over the years, but I have my teaching notes also, which were all written out. Do you think we could get together sometime and hash it all out? I want to do it not for my sake, but for Faulkner's, for no one seems to see this deep piety in his work, his overall joy at getting it all down. The Reavers is pure celebration of that enormous and self-effacing love. And then finally, sometime later, I think this was final, she settled upon this as the topic of the book she wanted to see in print, which would focus on the Snopes trilogy and the Reavers as the full-blown manifestations of his comic vision. And this is the focus of this seminar. This is what Dr. Cowan Baynard came up with. So then she called this the upward movement from Snopesism, not the downward plunge into Snopesism, but the upward movement from Snopesism. And she attaches a little note to that. She says, badly written perhaps, talking about what follows, but states the idea. So here she is. Writers who can portray the fullness of the human situation are few indeed. We enshrine them in a list of great books and think of them as, in a way, missionaries for the ideas and values out of which a culture emerges. There is no accounting for a Shakespeare or a Homer, and to maintain that William Faulkner is one of their rank, a writer from a state that has long been considered the most backward region of the Union, is to utter a shocking, if not unbelievable, claim. It is the suggestion of this book, however, that William Faulkner of Oxford, Mississippi, is just such a prophetic voice. His work encompasses 19 novels and a great number of short stories which, when compared with his life and background, stunned the imagination. His work, like Shakespeare's, defies the law of probability. Such a man as William Faulkner, college dropout, pretender to military valor, regarded by many who knew him as Count No Count, could not possibly have written works of such erudition, such encompassing imagination, such idealistic purpose. Someone else must have passed them off under Faulkner's name. That we are able calmly to read such great novels as Go Down Moses, Absalom, and The Mansion, aware that they and 16 others were all written by the same man, a seemingly unlettered Southerner, should stagger the imagination of those who devote themselves to measuring the movements of taste. Faulkner himself describes the writer's task as a depiction of, quote, the old verities, I'm sure we're familiar with that phrase, and portrays the evolution of the human as impelled by nothing inherently noble, but by a primitive sense of justice so deeply imagined that life itself is unimportant compared to the fulfillment of this imperative. His vision is always paradoxical. Something ignoble, revenge, becomes the goad impelling the great unwashed masses of humankind to become part of the human project, to emerge finally from the dust of the earth out of which they were created, joining the long human recording with Helen and the bishops, the scornful and graceless seraphim. So that was going to be her prologue to the book. And this was getting close to the time that she passed. And she also gave me an outline, which I still work from. And then this is what she concludes in this email. What is required to save the human race from the state of entropy into which it has fallen after its lapse from the garden? Faulkner begins the Hamlet with a portrayal of the post-lapsarian human state after the fall. We should describe the reign of Will Varner in the community and the arrival of Flem Snopes. Faulkner calls the downward impulsion toward the original state of nothingness Snopesism, viewing it mythically as the influence of the fallen angels on a creature who, being free, is able to choose ill as well as good. The Snopes trilogy is thus Faulkner's statement about the evolution of civilization. As a dark and ironic comedy, it lacks the poetic beauty of the theme as it is treated in Go Down Moses, but what it lacks in lyric tenderness, it makes up for in the intellectual complexity of its darkly comic style. The struggle upward towards civilization is shown to be, then, a fall from the garden state. It has been motivated by nothing seemingly noble, but rather by a transformation of the primitive lex talionis, the inbuilt law of retaliation. This downward progress of the human, to separate from the human community in a battle for its own rights, is impelled and guided by the bitter scorn and malice of the fallen angels. I would have never put that mythic perspective on this work, on that trilogy. But in its execution, the human motive of revenge is gradually altered by the hidden interiority of the almost obliterated image in which mankind was originally created. In the human community, there remain only traces of its former splendor. Eula Varner's impelling beauty, like Snopes' unlimited love, like Ike Snopes' unlimited love and tenderness for all creatures, the inherent sense of justice and wisdom of the sewing machine salesman V.K. Ratliff, the chivalry of the gentleman Gavin Stevens, and the deeply embedded code of manners of the town. These forces join the inherent sense of justice represented by Stevens and the canny wisdom of the folk, as evidenced in the sewing machine salesman V.K. Ratliff. This ill-suited pair, a local Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, a Tom Sawyer and a Huckleberry Finn, choose for their hero not the idealism of a boy, but the unlikely love and grief of a young woman whose name, Linda Snopes, indicates in itself her predicament. The daughter figure, so prominent in Western literature and now endangered by being incorporated into the Snopes household, is taught by a mentor the meaning of love and grief. This unlikely group of heroes, all motivated by a love of beauty and the sense of its loss by the ravages of Snopesism, focuses finally on a member of the Snopes clan as the actual executor of their resistance, Mink Snopes, too low to be protected even by the law of the tribe, becomes the executor of their deliverance from the growing spread of nothingness taking over the entire human project. The horror of that dry rot, as Faulkner referred to it, is not to be found in its nothingness per se, but in the disguise of that vacuity, so that its emptiness seems to be substantial and real. And she says, see Flem's calling for his soul in hell in the Hamlet, as we remember, to find only a small greasy spot in the container in which it has been stored. Henry James once wrote that America would be saved by a girl. After despairing of Caddy Compson's loss in his first serious novel, Faulkner goes on to portray this disastrous cultural diminishment in As I Lay Dying, Sanctuary, Absalom, Absalom, and Light in August, dramatizing this action and culminating in Eula Varner's suicide in his late novel The Town in 1957. In that work, Gavin Stevens, the local lawyer, overcome and beaten in his own efforts to stop the proliferation of Snopesism, devotes himself to the education of a young woman, Linda Snopes, illegitimate daughter of the town beauty Eula Varner, married off to Flem Snopes. Gavin fosters in Linda through the study of John Donne's poetry, the courage and passion necessary for the heroic task. Thus the force that can stop Snopesism stems not from a young man's vigor, but rather the courage and love of a young woman. Linda Snopes is the daughter of the tragic Helen figure Eula Varner, captured and abused by Flem Snopes, the origin and source of the tawdriness, the nothingness, this new disease afflicting humankind through its loss of the traditional ties with land and the necessity for the human bonds that accompanied agrarian communities. Faulknerian allegory in the Snopes trilogy is nothing like what we have come ever since the Middle Ages to call allegory. When Faulkner attempted that form in a fable, he was, by general agreement, less than successful. The secondary meaning seemed forced, not complying with the literal level, which Faulkner was able to handle with enormous ease in such works as Light in August, published in 1932. Several years had passed between the fable and the mansion, and in that time Faulkner regained his easy narrative style, grounding the mansion in an earthly account that seems on the face of it a skillful reporting of natural tale. And so I'm going to break off there with what I've gotten from Louise's notes and just end with this paragraph from me, contemplating, where I am with it and where we got to before she passed away. So I'll take that comic vision as I'm taking it as the direction of my writing. The critical lens through which I will attempt to discern the significance of Faulkner's comic vision is the theory of the literary genres developed by Louise Cowan over the course of her long career as professor of literature at the University of Dallas. The most comprehensive treatment of genre since Aristotle's original study in the 4th century BCE. And that treatment commenced with her serious consideration of comedy, contained and memorialized in The Terrain of Comedy in 1984, the first of 4 volumes devoted to the literary kinds, with Dr. Louise as general editor and featuring in each an introductory chapter on the genre being treated, followed by essays written by her colleagues and students from the many decades of her illustrious career. And so I brought with me that first one. This is 1984, the first of those 4 volumes, The Terrain of Comedy, and the other ones are also in print. And so I wanted to just flash that before finishing. But thank you for listening. I know some of you may know stories of Louise and have anecdotes about her experiences with her that I don't. So if you have anything to add, I would love to hear them, or additions to what you've heard tonight. Plenty more of that. So obviously some of it is worthy of working into print. But you know, just her claim for Faulkner. And I don't see, what I see today in the contemporary scholarship is an understanding that after the Nobel Prize, he had done his serious work and he just sort of went quiet. You know, none of that amounts to the stature of his earlier work. And here Louise is saying that, you know, no, quite the contrary. You know, it leads up to a culmination of his full oeuvre, you know, in the Reavers, that last, which she calls a celebration of the comic. So, you know, Louise was, she had such a deep belief in comedy, and she got that from her husband, Don Cowan, you know, and because she would say that she was basically a tragic figure, and Don was a comic figure. And, you know, and then, you know, when she would become mourning about this or that, he would say something like, I remember her saying this more than once, yeah, that's right, we're rising in a falling elevator. So those two things together, you know. And so, but I think she imbibed her comic spirit from him, essentially. This is what you see in her writings. So this is what she wanted to end with, Mrs. Faulkner. Anything?
I just want to see that book.
But yeah. Yeah. No pressure, right?
But we've gathered here just to try to encourage you to work.
Yeah, that's right.
Give you
I know it, yeah, and you know, it was all, but when I think about the number of years, you know, that we've been talking about it, and then the meager output from me, then that really does.
Would it be comprised mainly of her notes and things like that, and your reflections, or would it be an anthology of essays?
Well, that's going to be my task, and you know, it's going to be. Right now, the way I'm looking at it is that it'll be quite an extensive analysis of her genre theory, you know, and then taking off from that into Faulkner, into Faulkner's work. But it'll basically be my reading of the trilogy, especially The Mansion. You know, my biggest consideration, you know, what I see is maybe the biggest obstacle, is that the right word, is the town. What do you do with the town? So much of the town is repeated in The Mansion, you know, and The Mansion is, I think, a superior novel to the town. So that's where I am right now, grappling with that. So.
Look forward to rereading the books.
Oh yeah. Yes.
I've only read very little of Faulkner, but I've always found reading him to be like a challenge of bravery, because he often is, from my readings, so dark. And I'm curious about this scope of this movement from tragedy to comedy, because it's almost overwhelming to think about reading so much tragedy in order to get to the comedy. But do you think that is the way you ought to read Faulkner, to move literally?
Yeah, it's almost like you earn your spurs by going through those. But oh, they're magnificent. They're just so wonderful. And I remember reading, you know, and I was a classmate with Dr. Thomas Pruitt here, and we would talk about those things. And I remember the huge impact that, first of all, Absalom had. That was the first novel that I studied, and I got that in Louise's annual Faulkner course. And I'm sitting there and remember her reading from Absalom, and I had never encountered anything like that before. So it was beautiful and majestic, and then going from that to something like Go Down Moses or Light in August, you just see his mastery, you can see his vision. So yeah, I'd have to say that, sorry, there's no short way around, and but
You're skipping to the end.
but you do. I mean, you know, like she says, even in The Sound and the Fury, which was his first serious work, the first one he got, you know, Flags in the Dust was a serious work too, but he didn't get that published for a long time. But you know, you see, even in those darkest works, what she's calling that the beauty of his vision. And there's plenty of comic possibility in those early things. I mean, you think about something like Light in August. I don't know whether you've read that or not, but it's lovely. You know, it really is. And it's also hard. It really is, because that is the novel in which arguably you could say that he has both tragedy and comedy. And Louise thought a lot, and he wrote a good bit about where the tragedy is possible. And then in tragedy, which was the third of our 4 genre books that we did at the Dallas Institute, she actually came out with a radical theory about tragedy and said that it, you know, whereas you could say that comedy, for example, you see comic rhythms and comic movements in real world. You don't see those in tragedy, that it's a ritual that has to be experienced communally in the theater or some gathering like that. And you know, she said so that she doesn't think that the novel can contain true tragedy. That was one of the more controversial things she said, and many of us disagreed with her. You know, that you can show true tragedy, and Joe Christmas in Light in August is a good example of that. And as Sutpin is in a different context in Absalom. But I think that you can see the true. I tried to, you know, and it was always a sort of a timid thing on my part to try to quarrel with her. But I saw that the possibility of tragedy and comedy, especially in Go Down Moses, because you begin with and again, you know, you begin with the horrible travesties of slavery, you know, and then you come all the way up to an execution of another African American, right? But he's not a slave, and it's under a different context. I think that when you go from Thomasina in Go Down Moses to Gavin Stevens, you know, you see that sort of emergence of comedy out of tragedy. And I think she was working with that when she was talking about Gavin as the comic figure in the trilogy as well. Yes.
So just to piggyback on that question, do you have a handle or a way in for those of us who have not read as much Faulkner as you have, as we start The Mansion? Do you have an entry point for us?
Well, I do. I mean, my
yeah, there's lots of books up there. So we're all
but there are a lot of people who could give some suggestions, and I have often said that, you know, if Faulkner's prose is the difficulty for you, right? You know, you just can't get through some of those 20-page sentences and things like that. The intricate structure. Read The Unvanquished, you know, which is a wonderful introduction, and then go from there. You know, but I'm sure you have some other thoughts about that.
Yeah.
Tom, you do.
Taught
Gary?
The Unvanquished to the juniors, high school juniors for years, and I think that is very accessible, and they really enjoy it as well.
So they reacted positively to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I try to teach the Reavers, and I almost succeeded, but their reading discipline is, you know, it really was. I think the best readers in the class got it.
Yeah.
It didn't get everybody.
Well, and the Reavers, to me, anyway, I mean, it's really like the reward for going through all the other words.
Yeah.
Which is,
If you don't know who the people are,
Yes.
reading the other things, it's not quite as exciting
No.
somehow. If you haven't read at least Go Down Moses beforehand or something.
what would you suggest?
Well, I was at the Faulkner conference this summer at Ole Miss, And it was 50th anniversary of that conference, and because I had to teach this class, I thought I should pretend to learn something at some point before the semester began. And it was one of the topics of conversation, because that conference is an interesting one in many ways. I mean, besides that you get to, have catfish for dinner at his house and all that, but it's also meant to be for high school teachers, really, to be there as well as sort of all the great Faulkner scholars around, and what to do with teaching Faulkner. And they've had a lot of different answers over the last 50 years, as anyone can imagine. And the Unvanquished came up as one option sometimes, but then the problem is it's almost a collection of short stories,
Sure.
sort of. I mean, as is also true in its own way of Go Down Moses. And so you don't quite, if you don't bite off something like Absalom, you are sort of not getting the full sense of who you're
Real
dealing
Faulkner.
with. You would never start in some sense with the mansion, but on the other hand, it is sort of the fulfillment of a vision. So there were other, a lot of people, The Sound of Fury is still, it's sort of, when I was a kid, that was the one they're like, you should read The Sound of Fury. It's sort of like with Conrad, they'll say you should just read Heart of Darkness, which is sort of starting with the most difficult. And maybe not the most representative, but it's, if they don't understand the first part of Sound of Fury, they will be blown away still by the second.
Yeah.
And it might invite them to reread and reconsider. It's a fascinating book to try to put together. So that has its contenders. Short stories are good because kids don't read too much. One of the complaints was that you probably shouldn't start people off with Rose for Emily, though it's often done, because it really is not. It's more like a strange Edgar Allan Poe story.
Yeah.
And although unless you're going to move maybe towards Flannery O'Connor, it's really Southern Gothic. So what I'm going to do tonight is Barn Burning. That's one that I've used. I used in Littrad 4 here, and worked pretty well. After Moby Dick, I thought, let's do Barn Burning. It's another kind of insane jackass we could find somewhere, but what to make of it. But I was talking to you because the course I'm teaching is really, so this semester is a course not on Faulkner or Southern literature, but the intro to literary study. And whoever's teaching it, you kind of determine what's a good, more or less single text or close collection of texts to use to teach these kids what it means to, they're graduate students, what it means to be a literary scholar at all, what are various approaches to a single good work. And everybody I talked to said, and I thought Light in August because it's on the reading list anyway. So it's not, it's long, but the narration is relatively straightforward, though there are many different stories being wrapped together. So it's not as immediately frightening as Absalom to me. And everybody seemed to think that is the best place to begin. If you've got students who can read a huge novel, you've got a group of grad students, and you have a whole semester, that's seemed to be sort of the right thing. But I don't know. I mean, I like The Reavers too is good because it does seem funny, but like we were saying, I wonder. It's somehow, if you haven't done the other things, I don't know that it really hits the right way. I guess here it used to be Go Down Moses was the Littrad 4. It would do Go Down Moses. And I was talking to Gregg.
Not all of it, just the ectoplasm.
Maybe just the part of it, yeah. And I was talking to Gregg Roper, who is from Mississippi, therefore must think about Faulkner to some point. And you saying, and I was telling too about this. I feel like one of the problems is, it used to be when you read it, all the kids grew up hunting. Now nobody.
They had their own
kids.
time.
Yeah, right. All the kids at UD even, right? I was like, now I read a whole collection of Faulkner novels this summer, and the hardest one for me was Go Down Moses. And I thought, well, just as well I hadn't picked that. Just now that I'm facing it, I don't know what I would do. So I do think Light in August in many ways is, and it's like you were saying, it's sort of in its own way a turning point. It's sort of the end of the first third of his career, practically speaking, but in terms of the imagination's scope is really full blown. But that's if you've got the time and space for it. I do think Barn Burning is a good choice. The Unvanquished a good choice.
Well, the short stories to me are uneven.
Yeah, that's
there's
the
some
thing.
Great ones.
Yeah.
One of his better ones, I think, is in the uncollected stories, and that's Race at Morning,
Yeah.
which you could put with Barn Burning.
Yeah.
But then, my question would be, you know, if you said, go read Barn Burning, and then I came back and I said, well, what now? So where do you go?
Yeah,
Where do you go
then
from
what now?
Barn Burning?
Yeah.
You know, but it's an amazing story. It really
Yeah.
is. I just reread it today,
Yeah.
and it
I don't know what
never
else. Yeah.
ceases to amaze.
I think the other story that they like, this is actually recently came out in Library of America, sort of all the stories. The one they like to collect the most besides Barn Burning Rose for Emily is Dry September,
Yeah.
which I actually don't know that well.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was my question. I mean, so I had the advantage with Literature 4. We had these big novels sort of as the main columns of the you know, holding up the roof of Mansfield Park and Moby Dick and Crime and Punishment. But then you're supposed to do also a lot of short stories, and I had aimed to do some Flannery O'Connor, but I thought, well, let's also do. So I just did Barn Burning, and then A Good Man Is Hard to Find, and Good Country People, and Revelation. And so it's sort of a feeling for a little bit of the southern things, and then some other totally unrelated short stories spread through, so I didn't have to answer that question for this course.
Wasn't Barn Burning supposed to be like the intro to the Hamlet?
Well, he wrote it. Actually, he had the thought in mind that it would be sort of a prologue, or at least an entry point into the Hamlet. But then he ditched that idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, but you know the Hamlet goes back to 1926 when he wrote Father Abraham.
Yeah, Barn Burning is I think 39.
Yeah, 39, something like that. So yeah, but and it always seemed to me to be a waste. Not exactly a waste, but you know, where's Sardi? You know, and you know, a lot of people say that well, he died. You know, he just died. But there's one little half sentence in Barn Burning that indicates that he didn't, because it says he would reflect on this 20 years later.
Yeah.
You know, and so you know, the implication is that he's grown up.
I have one general question, Larry. So, talking about tragedy and comedy, but you know, the question often comes up: you know, what is the American epic? You know, great American epic. And it's always struck me that Faulkner's created this universe with Yakutawka County, and it covers this epic time period for the United States. It seems like if you bring, you know, the way Louise has these 19 novels in her mind, you know, a stretch of these novels, in a sense, could constitute the American epic, and be a very good contender for it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's a really valid point to make. And you know, this is all, of course, opinion, right? You know, but if I was asked to name a single word that was the American epic, I'd say Moby Dick. But I think you make a good point. You know, that if in terms of the whole canvas of his works, he sort of gets to it all, and including in short stories. You know, if that's part of his universe as well, the Native Americans.
Yeah.
As well as a good bit of that in Go Down Moses. So yeah. But you know, I still think it's remarkable, and I always did. And I didn't know Dr. Roper was from Mississippi.
Yeah.
You
You wouldn't guess.
No,
I don't know how, would you?
No, you wouldn't. Now, I'm from Mississippi, and you would guess. But I always attributed Louise's thinking that I could work on this with her to the fact that I'm from Mississippi, and so I could talk the talk or something like that. What it was. But, you know, I think that's really a good point that you made.
Should we get started on Barn
Yes,
Burning?
we got change over here. I got copies of the story. If I have many copies of the story, this should be enough for everybody up there. And here's your copy.
Thank you. Oh, this is not very American.
Yeah, I copied this. Yeah, Teresa from UT Dallas. So maybe we can get her to show up here one of these weeks. I heard her lecture at this summer, and she saw me. Oh yeah. I'm gonna email her soon and tell her about this.
And she had a book. She's got a book.
I think so. Well, she edited the stories as one, so she's the one who did the stories, but she has something else more. Yeah, she gave one of the plenary lectures in Oxford. Yeah, sort of like I met Louise very briefly in passing at some point, not too long before her death. I was already in the monastery at that point. I think the reason I'm here, sort of like Louise trusting you because you're from Mississippi, is Boehner trusting me because I went to Sewanee. I must somehow be able to say something about anything. We often say that's the skill of a Sewanee graduate. You can talk for a few minutes about anything, and that's how you, at the museum reception, you can always say something about the work of art. But then I'm working on this course. What I'm hoping to do right now is give a kind of reading of Barn Burning inspired by what we've been exchanging different emails in anticipation of this seminar. Dr. Moonback, Dr. Allums, Dr. Cowan, and myself, and Andy, and also just my conversations with Dr. Cowan. So trying to give a kind of comic reading, as it were, of Barn Burning, but of the type that I think we're aiming to do. So here we go. First, one might read the story a lot of different ways, as is true of any story. One reason why it's good to start with Barn Burning, besides that it is on its own an excellent story, it is in its own way, as we were just saying, like one of the little seeds of what we might get in the mansion. We have Abner Snopes. We're in Snopes land. Sardi Snopes is here, a fascinating boy. He sort of disappears. The vision of the trilogy when you get there, it's a very, very brief preface to the mansion, and Faulkner talks about it fulfilling something that began back in 26. And one of the things that I had pointed out in our emails was that, in some sense, it's Sartorus, or flags in the dust, and he had soldiers' pay and mosquitoes, but he's remembering really the beginning of his career. He moved to New Orleans, and he found a room, and it turned out that it was Sherwood Anderson's room. He was gone being Sherwood Anderson somewhere. He'd already, this is well after Winesburg, Ohio. And it was Sherwood Anderson that, in many ways, Faulkner, who 100 years ago, Faulkner published his first book, a volume of poems, The Marble Faun. His birthday also was yesterday, by the way, 127 it would have been. But it's Sherwood Anderson who gave him the inspiration and a lot of lessons, the encouragement, and I think even practical encouragement to the publisher, perhaps, to get his first novel put together. So the mansion somehow is going to, in some way, is the place to start in our own way. Barn Burning is a really incipient little moment, maybe, of the imaginary life that culminates with the mansion and then the Reavers, his last two works. One problem then is Barn Burning might make it too easy. It's a small story. It's also a story about a child, and nothing against children, but their worlds are small, so everything seems big, and so it could be an exaggeration. But I want to start with, this is on page. Some of the page numbers got chewed up by my attempts to clean up the scan, but this is page 198, which is the one before 199. It's all there. In the middle of that, they went back up the road. This is still early on in the story. I'll get back to where this fits in a moment. They went back up the road a week ago, or before last night, that is. He would have asked where they were going, but not now. His father had struck him before last night, but never before had he paused afterward to explain why. It was as if the blow and the following calm, outrageous voice still rang, repercussed, divulging nothing to him, save the terrible handicap of being young, the light weight of his few years, just heavy enough to prevent his soaring free of the world, as it seemed to be ordered, but not heavy enough to keep him footed solid in it, to resist it and try to change the course of its events. So we have a character who's in this middle ground, right? Not too young, but not old enough to live, but not move anything. not even be able to ask his father where they're going, though his father has just moved him to a new level by not just whopping him, but telling him why. So the story also, whatever I say, needs to be limited. It's just this little moment in what is a longer and never told life. So we shouldn't, this is not meant to be a kind of keystone of the arch that we will build with the mansion. This is sweeping the ground on which we will build the mansion. It's an attempt to try something with a shorter story to see how maybe at the end of the mansion we can think back to barn burning and is what more has been added that is absent here from the inevitable fact of it being just a kid. Something about kids' stories are clearer, but there's also, as he says, sort of a certain depth requires time, which is not offered to us here. So it is a story also that it's easy to read, as with all of Faulkner's. One that our goals is to fight this ease. It's easy to read all of it pretty negatively, darkly, fatalistically, and that's what we're hoping to get away from. So this story ends, and we'll go back just in a second and really read the beginning. And I've got sort of a way of thinking about how the whole story flows that has a certain kind of comic energy I can try to explain, and we can try to discuss and define and put in some broader contexts. But it ends with him looking into the dark woods he will go into, which rings with pretty obvious echo of Dante, and it says he doesn't turn back. He doesn't look back, which, of course, Dante doesn't quite do, but also sounds a little bit like Orpheus. But that's Orpheus leaving hell, except Orpheus does look back. So it's a puzzling conclusion. The boy has just, the climactic moment, he has, as his father goes to burn yet another barn, the boy runs off to alert the homeowner, Major Despain, who owns the big mansion that they're now near, and just barn, and runs off. And Major Despain runs off, and we hear the gunshots of, as we can imagine, little Sardi's father being killed. And the boy kind of then runs off and is about to wander from that moment into the dark woods. So we could read that a lot of painful ways, and it is obviously an intensely painful experience. The story, if you read it, it reads well all in one sitting, though it's got, to my mind, about 15 little scenes. There's no gaps in the text, really, like in Light in August, where it's every 3 pages you kind of stop and have to restart. And that's a challenge there. Light in August has got about 66 little sections, and as I count them, actually as he marked them. But we're also hearing the whippoorwill at the end, countless whippoorwills, and which is supposed to be, as you may know, a sign that death is impending somehow if the whippoorwills are whippoorwilling around your house. Though they're probably just doing their own thing, but it seems it's a beautiful sound, but it's early in the morning and maybe a little frightening. Something's opening up that you don't want. We could read it darkly. It's you can't get away unless you destroy somehow. Or it could even be father versus mother. Mother is there, very interesting, and he flees from her, arranges father's death. Oedipus is right around the corner. Or even a kind of, his father does have a sense of the way things are supposed to go. It's not a very happy sense, but it's sort of stick with your blood. And you have to betray that and run off to be an upper class person. You've got sort of the victory of a certain kind of status of wealth. Or is there some kind of higher piety that the boy is intuited, that is what we would have known more about if we had more of his story? So I think it is an easy story to get off on the wrong foot with. So let's try to get off on the right foot. We'll read the beginning. It's page 193, but I included the title page and stuff for you. Just feels like it's not as much stealing from a book by copying the title page. So So we start with a courtroom scene, one of two, in a local store. The JP is there, and we won't read the crime exactly, but I want to just notice this. What I'm going to try to do is show that there's a kind of comedy of one way of understanding it. Comedy, rather straightforwardly, I suppose, is a sort of sense of release, though Aristotle, of course, applies something like that to the tragic, the experience of tragedy for the audience, right? A kind of whatever catharsis is, some kind of release. But that here is a release not of destruction, and then you go off into the dark wood and recreate something of your own, but a kind of new birth. I want to show here the opening, a kind of free fall, as there's two forces pulling the boy. So the store in which the justice of the peace's court was sitting smelled of cheese. It's a good first line. The boy, crouched on his nail keg at the back of the crowded room, knew he smelled cheese and more. From where he sat, he could see the ranked shelves close packed with the solid, squat, dynamic shapes of tin cans whose labels his stomach read, not from the lettering, which meant nothing to his mind, but from the scarlet devils and the silver curve of fish. This, the cheese which he knew he smelled, and the hermetic meat which his intestines believed he smelled, coming in intermittent gusts, momentary and brief, between the other constant one, the smell and sense just a little of fear, because mostly of despair and grief, the old fierce pull of blood. He could not see the table where the justice sat, and before which his father and his father's enemy, our enemy, he thought in that despair, ourn, mine and his both, he's my father, stood, but he could hear them, two of them, that is, because his father had said no word yet. We get first wave of testimony. If we go over to the next page, they call the boy forward, and he's worried. We want to know what really happened. This is a matter of difficulty with a pig and a barn getting burned down, and a black man being sent ahead of time to warn them that wood and hay can burn. So hint, hint. And the boy there, this is the sort of middle of the first paragraph as he sort of come up. He saw the men between himself and the table part and become a lane of grim faces, at the end of which he saw the justice, a shabby, collarless, graying man in spectacles beckoning him. The story also has a lot of this linear movement, but we might talk about it later if we feel like it's important. He felt no floor under his bare feet. He's sort of off the world now, right? He seemed to walk beneath the palpable weight of the grim turning faces. His father, stiff in his black Sunday coat, donned not for the trial, but for the moving, which he knows he's going to have to do next, right? Did not even look at him. He aims for me to lie, he thought. Again with that frantic grief and despair, and I will have to do it. What's your name, boy? The justice said. Colonel Sartorus Snopes. The boy, sorry, I said it too loud. He whispered, the boy whispered.
P.T. Barn.
I'll keep going, yeah. Hey, the justice said, talk louder. Colonel Sartorus, I reckon anybody named for Colonel Sartorus in this country can't help but tell the truth, can they? The boy said nothing. Enemy, he thought. For a moment he could not see that the justice's face was kindly, nor discern that his face was troubled when he spoke to the man named Harris. Do you want me to question this boy? But he could hear, and during those subsequent long seconds where there was absolutely no sound in the crowded little room save that of quiet and intent breathing, it was as if he had swung outward at the end of Grapevine, over a ravine, Tarzan, and at the moment, at the top of the swing, had been caught in a prolonged instant of mesmerized gravity, weightless in time. No, Harris said violently, explosively, damnation, send him out of here. Now time, fluid world rushed beneath him again, the voices coming to him again through the smell of cheese and sealed meat, the fear and despair, and the old grief of blood. case closed. All right, it's great. But so you see there, so this opening moment to me, right? You've got the pool of blood, and he feels it real clearly. I was going to say real clear. You start reading, so you got to go back to standard English. So as he walks, as he is called forth, he, in the italics, he aims for me to lie. He knows what his dad wants. But he also feels the pull of the justice. The justice said, hey, right? And draws him forward. Right? And this produces that sort of free fall experience of, and there's no world below me, sort of out on the vine, over the abyss, or what is it? And then with then the other side, then that side rejects him, pushes him back, and so the world is flowing again, right? So he is trapped somehow. He is like the deviled ham in the can, right? He can sense it. There's this meat that's there somehow. His intestines believed he smelled it, the hermetic meat. Some mysterious meat, sealed, but also it's sort of, it's Hermes is guiding you to the underworld, right? Leading the soul on. And the rest of the story, in a way, follows this sort of increasing movement and constrained until there's a sort of burst away at the end, right? So what will follow is we go off to, he lands in this sort of grief. The old blood has kind of got him. He's going with Dad out the store, and one of these half-grown boys says, "Barn burner," you know? And little boy now instinctively follows the energy of Dad and jumps the kid, it seems, bonks head in the ground, sort of this kind of instinctive, but it's described as unfeeling, feeling no shock when, this is over on 195, no shock when his head struck the earth. So he's in a numb state. Then they get back on the wagon, and he has this halting sense of the father's evil over on 196. The wagon went on, the store, the very top of that page. The store with its quiet crowd of grimly watching men dropped behind. A curve in the road hit it, and we get the beginning of another movement. Forever, he thought. Maybe he's done satisfied now. Now that he has stopping himself. Right? Dad's not done. He will do this a few other times in the story. Maybe now we're cured. Maybe Dad now won't need more. And it turns out Dad's one of those people you gotta shoot him before you can even say hello. There's no cure in the story for Abner. He halts himself from thinking about whether his father might get better, whether now we've exited something. So he is here like the mule. We see this twice in the story. We hear also it's about the descendants of the Snopes, the way they drive cars. Well, the way Ab drives a mule, and he'll do this again at the end when he's taking the boy, they're going back up to the house, on the way back from the house to deliver the ruined rug. The father finally gets on the mule, and he whacks the mule in the neck with the switch, while he also pulls back in the reins. And it's just like he says, it's sort of like the guy revving the automobile, sort of when it hits the gear. And this is how the descendants drive. The boy is the canned meat. The boy is sort of this mute. He's sort of in this stasis, but very uncomfortable stasis, like the swinging out over the ravine kind of, there's no world, what's going to get you back? And for a while, he's still dragged along again. So we get to the new place where there's now a real proper mansion. They've moved to a richer part. They've already exhausted all the theft and robbery they can do and sort of sharecropping in the poorer part. Now they've gotten to this limit. And they've settled into the unpainted little 2-door cabin. And Abner's going to go say hello to the landlord. And he decides to take the boy with him. At that moment, this is over let's go where actually? I wonder if I can mark. The mother steps in and said, yeah, over on 198 where we began actually. Come with me. Me? He said. Yes. His father said. You and Abner, his mother said. His father paused and looked back, the harsh level stare beneath the shaggy, graying, irascible brows. And she doesn't say much else. They don't say much to each other, these married couple. But we see there, the mother knows. This is the old pattern. You're going to take the boy. I think she's worried that Abner, father, is going to destroy this boy by making him watch the way that Abner does things. He drags him up to the mansion, where he rather intentionally smushes he's got a bad leg from getting hit in the Civil War by a musket ball, but he wasn't on either side of the war. He was just a horse thief, effectively. He gets it in a big pile of horse shit and drags it right into the house, smears it all over the rug, stomps, turns, and the boy is forced in a way to watch this. While on the path to the house, the boy has his next vision of another side. There's the justice of the peace, swing that way, right? But then back to Dad. Dad drags you along, and then he sees the mansion. Sort of famous passage. A vision of this. It's so orderly and beautiful in its columns. He thinks to himself, maybe that will cure my father, right? This is on 199 in italics. Maybe he will feel it too. This sort of. And when he gets in the house, he feels the sort of warm wash of the curled staircase washes over him. And his father is this very cold being, though his father is also connected with fire. And I'll get back to that, I hope, at the end. Maybe it will even change him now from what maybe he couldn't help but be. Maybe this will change him. And the boy is so grieved, right? These people, they're safe from him. He can't mess with people with a house like this, right? But doesn't work yet. Dad ruins the carpet. We go back home. But we already see at this point, when they get back and the father is got to be fixing he's tasked by Major Despain with repairing the rug, which surely the Major knows is not going to work, but I don't know if that's a trap or if it's just naive or if it's just a sense of justice, but that's not what I'm dealing with at this moment. And while the daughters and Ab are working on the carpet with the hot water and the homemade lye that's clearly bleaching it and ruining it, and then scrubbing it with a roadstone, Sardi is doing something he likes. He's chopping wood, and he's looking at that Dad from a distance. And when Dad occasionally, once at least we have narrated, Dad looks over at him. He pretends he's not watching. Right? So there's a separation already. And the separation involves Sardi not murdering his father. He doesn't imagine that the wood is his father's neck that he's chopping. Faulkner could have done that. Made it very interesting. But it's work that he likes. This also happens again later. We start this sense of like chopping wood. And kind of imagine for a moment that you have a real life. And you're not watching your father effectively destroy this. He's 10 years old. He's lived in at least 12 places. That's tough. But then, maybe because the father perceives what's going to happen, he's made to ride along again. He's taken back with the father to the mansion to return the ruined rug at night. This is where we get the mule. The next time we're on the mule and watching the way he drives it. But the boy, again, is at a distance. He's left outside. He's left with the mule. Well, Dad takes the rug and in the middle of the night, lights are off, slams it down on the front porch. Dad comes back, and the boy again he in that first moment, you remember he lunged kind of unfeelingly, instinctively lunged to defend his father. Now he's whispering to his father, but is it gonna be okay? What's gonna happen? Then the next sort of step, of course, is next day. Major comes out saying, you ruined $100. It's a lot, still a lot for a rug in my mind, but not, of course, in those days. This is a rug from France. It's been imported for the mansion, and it's nice and bright and white. Now it's got this big poo stain all over it. And Major comes to sort of say, well, you're going to have to pay me back, so I'm going to take 20 bushels of corn from your first crop. It's going to be in your contract. You got to come sign. And the boy tells his dad, well, he won't get that. We'll hide it. He sort of saw on Dad's side again. We'll hide it, and which of course is dumb, and ain't gonna happen. And then again, we're back in the courtroom again, and this is over. Sort of moved quickly ahead. This is over on 205. At the top of that page, he ain't done it. The boy starts vocally testifying to defend his father. He ain't done it. He ain't burnt. Go back to the wagon, his father said. Burnt, the justice said. Do I understand this rug was burned too? Does anybody here claim it was? Because of course the boy has already said he ain't burning barns down. So he's too much on Dad's side. But right before that, on page 204, the second moment of a sort of cure envisioned, or maybe we could think of third. So one is maybe Dad's done with it. Now he's burned maybe this is his last barn. Then it's the vision of the mansion. And then this brief passage of the sort of working, building the things they need to do. They were running a middle buster now over in 204, so plow, particular kind. His brother holding the plow straight while he handled the reins, is an older brother, and walking beside the straining mule, the rich black soil shearing cool and damp against his bare ankles. He thought maybe this is the end of it. Maybe even that 20 bushels it seems hard to have to pay for just a rug will be a cheap price for him to stop forever and always from being what he used to be. Thinking, dreaming now, so that his brother had to speak sharply to him to mind the mule. Maybe he even won't collect the 20 bushels. Maybe it will all add up and balance and vanish corn, rug, fire, the terror and grief, the being pulled two ways, like between two teams of horses, gone, done with forever and ever. Maybe this vision of like good work, beautiful soil, rich soil pouring up all the way to his ankle, working with his brother, right? Maybe we won't actually be punished as we deserve. Sort of vision of a grace, unmerited forgiveness. But it's in that work, but we'll work, and maybe the land will produce so much that 20 won't be that big a deal. But then it was Saturday, and we're back in the justice of the peace court. So we see that there's this continual sort of, I think Faulkner intentionally increasing the tension and the energy, sort of the swings. It's not, the movements aren't increasing really, but actually we're getting closer and closer and closer to Father. But we're also in our thoughts moving further and further away. We're waiting for when are we going to be untrapped, right? Sort of released in a way. I mean, this is what I was sort of suggest. That's kind of the comic energy, right, as it were. Not by any means funny. Although, I think smearing the poop on the carpet's actually kind of funny. There's certain moments there, but they're very brief little touches. So he blurts out in the court, hadn't burnt when he's banished from that. On the way out, when the fine is changed to just 10 bushels, the boy is still mumbling now. He won't get those 10 bushels, but he's changed the energy with which he tries to impress his father that he's standing up for him is diminished, because his father clearly doesn't think that I'm not sure why, actually, what the father thinks there. We don't get a lot of insight into Abner, who is depicted at one he's like a tin cutout, two-dimensional. If you turned him, you wouldn't even create a shadow. Depthless, but kind of absolute. But he's an absolute minimum, whereas the house is this absolute maximum in its own way. Then we get towards the burning scene. The father knows again to try to make the son get involved. go get the oil can. There's an interesting middle scene of fixing the wagon at the blacksmith shop and getting some food, and you sort of know that Abner knows what he's going to do in the evening, but the boy doesn't yet know it and thinks maybe things are okay. Yeah.
Just to add to you've got that tension that you're describing in that scene with the blacksmiths.
Yeah.
That to me that's always been my favorite
It's a great-
scene
yeah.
in the story, because the father is sitting there talking easily to the others.
Yeah.
And when the boy says he won't even get one, his dad goes in and brings out food,
Yeah.
and he divides
Cheese and
it.
crackers, divides the cheese.
And they're eating together, and the dad is talking, and asking questions and listening to answers. And then the boy goes over and he looks at that circus poster.
Yeah, the circus poster. Behind his dad was a circus poster.
And
Yeah.
it's almost like he can imagine delight.
Yeah. All the taffeta.
And they're together, the brothers and the dad, and they're eating, and dad's
Yeah.
talking, and
Yeah.
it's what he likes. He likes horses and all that. So I think it just adds to
Yeah,
that pattern
right,
you
right.
just described.
Yeah, you're right, yeah. And
It's the closest he gets
yeah,
to the dad.
in the story.
Yeah.
And to
It's almost
imagine
heartbreaking.
not just the the work of the farm, but now living in the community.
Yeah.
Right. So this is a place that here this could work. It looks like it could work if Dad just weren't the way he's got to be or something. Not that one has to be that, but yeah. But then I what scares me in that scene is once you know the story. Of course, it is called barn burning. You wonder whether this is the dad sort of getting whatever he can on credit before he knows he has to run from town. I'll pay you back tomorrow for the block of cheese, but then maybe, or is it the dad also a moment of is it a tenderness or whatever with the boys? I mean, he does divide the cheese fairly, and it's a complicated.
It is, as long as the boy's going to do what he wants him to do.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah, there's that.
then
This
there can
this is
be
the
some
mouse's
intimacy.
cheese.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Dad was a horse trader. Was he, or was he a horse thief?
Yeah, he was rescuing horses, I think is what he was doing, and gets shot in the back, which is not always the best place to get shot if you anyway. But it's good. It's important to actually bring in that. Then we get to the actual burning, and the kid's got to go get the oil, and he thinks to himself, maybe I should run away. So bottom of 207, as we lead to that last dramatic moment, and then we'll read the ending, which is very striking. And there's a last cure as well, but it's a cure for the boy. So go to the barn and get that can of oil we were oiling the wagon with, he said. The boy did not move. Stuck again. Then he could speak. What? He cried, what are you? Go get that oil, his father said. Go. So the boy obviously understands, right? Then he was moving, running outside the house, toward the stable. This the old habit, the old blood, which he had not been permitted to choose for himself, which had been bequeathed him willy-nilly, and which had run for so long, and who knew where, battening on what of outrage and savagery and lust before it came to him. I could keep on, he thought. I could run on and never look back, never need to see his face again, only I can't. The rusted can in his hand now, liquid sploshing in it as he ran back to the house and into the sound of his mother's weeping in the next room, and handed the can to his father. He imagines for a moment, maybe now is my chance to just run away from them all. But I can't. There's still one more pull. Then they really bind him. The idea is to actually tie him up, because they perceive he's going to run and he's going to tattle, right? But they don't tie him up. Instead, Dad, my sense is, decides to make sure that Mom is also in her place. You hold him tight. He squirms his way out. And there's that burst moment at the bottom of 208, the beginning of it. Let him go, the aunt said. If you don't go before God, I am going up there myself. Well, the aunt's a very important little entry. I think it's the wife's sister, right?
Yeah.
Don't you see I can't? His mother cried. Sorry, no, help me, Lizzie. And then he was free. He's afraid he's not going to quite make it. He runs to the house, collapses in there, barges through the door. Barn. Despain, where's barn, barn? They get the message. Then we get the concluding moment. So we're on 210. Let's read this paragraph and then comment, and then read the end. And I've commented on the fire in general, and I've also something from Light in August that is, I think, related to it. And then the last thought. So he could not. He ran down the drive, blood and breath roaring. Presently he was in the road again, though he could not see the road. He could not hear either. The galloping mare was almost upon him. This is Despain on his horse, the sorrel mare. Was almost upon him before he heard her, and even then he held his course, as if the very urgency of his wild grief and need must in a moment more find him wings, waiting until the ultimate instant to hurl himself aside and into the weed-choked roadside ditch as the horse thundered past and on for an instant in furious silhouette against the stars, the tranquil early summer night sky, which even before the shape of the horse and rider vanished, stained abruptly and violently upward. A long, swirling roar, incredible and soundless. Soundless roar. Blotting the stars, and he springing up and into the road again, running again, knowing it was too late, yet still running, even after he heard the shot, and an instant later 2 shots, pausing now without knowing he had ceased to run, crying, "Pap, pap!" Running again. Before he knew, he had begun to run, stumbling, tripping over something, and scrabbling up again without ceasing to run, looking backward over his shoulder at the glare as he got up, running on among the invisible trees, panting, sobbing, "Father, Father!" It's good. 2 shots, pap, pap, right? He's the gun, right? He knows. He did what he wanted to do, but what he didn't want to do, he goes to get them to stop his father from being his father, or from being what he wants him to be, his father, but he doesn't want him to be the way he is, right? And the only way to stop him, though, it turns out to be to kill him. He goes from pap, pap, the gun sound, father, father. Next paragraph you see where it becomes the inner thought, father, my father, he thought. And then he thinks about he was brave, he was in Colonel Sartorus's cavalry. He wasn't, but he doesn't know that. It seems like he finds out later in life. There's this experience of approaching flight, right? It's going to have wings. The black servant in the house tries to stop the boy, but grabs his sleeve, and the whole sleeve just tears off. The boy just flies. He's being sort of reduced down to just himself, and the grief and the need, right, will find him wings. Like we saw earlier, he's barely on the ground. He's this lightweight being, right? He's in that middle moment. He's on the ground, but he's not got quite traction, but he's heavy enough not to get blown off the planet by the wind. But now he's about to fly. And he's just the running of that paragraph, both grammatically and in the repetition of the word, and in the experience, the kind of culminating experience of running from father. He's running actually along towards his father as the horse is going, but the horse outpaces him. He's both going to his father and he's going to kill his father, which is also sort of to make now he feels really for the first time father, not dad or whatever, sort of moving to a new formality. The soundless roar of the sky. So it's a silent moment, but it's full of this crying, strange noise as the sky stains upward. Interesting, just verb creation. But he knows that is over. He, in a sense, here, I feel, what I'm saying is there's a kind of tragic comic release, right? I mean, the comedy of the story, in some simplistic way, is that this boy who is trapped in a kind of infernal situation, he's the deviled ham in the can, is released to a better life. But that's a little bit simplistic, because that requires getting someone to kill his own father. In a sense, that beautiful vision of the mansion of orderliness is stained with blood. It's not enough just to look at the mansion, the beautiful place. It's not enough to cure the problem. Good farming soil, not enough to cure the thing. Getting back on one guy burning his barn is not enough to cure it. The beautiful vision of the White House is also sort of marred. It needs to be this forceful thing. That's what it takes to open the can of ham and let the hermetic meat out, right? It requires this violence, but there's a beautiful sense of calm and release into a kind of new life. And it's imaged as no longer just a swinging back and forth. And you get, as if to say, and then finally the one side loses, the old blood is dead, and now we have a new thing. It's learning to fly. It's like the horse, right? At midnight, he was sitting on the crest of a hill. He did not know it was midnight, and he did not know how far he had come. It's not a question of knowledge, comedy, right? But there was no glare behind him now, and he sat now, his back toward what he had called home for 4 days anyhow, his face toward the dark woods which he would enter when breath was strong again. Small, shaking steadily in the chill darkness, hugging himself into the remainder of his thin, rotten shirt. The grief and despair, now no longer terror and fear, but just grief and despair, which is a great gain. I mean, that's sort of that's to me that summarizes the result of the comic moment, at least for this time, right? It's not terror and fear; it's just grief and despair. Father, my father, he thought. He was brave, he cried suddenly aloud, but not loud. No more than a whisper. He was in the war, he was Colonel Sargers's cavalry. Not knowing that his father had gone to that war a private in the final European sense, wearing no uniform and bending the authority of and giving fidelity to no man or army or flag, going to war as Malbrook, which is probably Marlborough, himself did for booty. It meant nothing, less than nothing to him if it were enemy booty or his own. He doesn't know that. The slow constellations wheeled on. It would be dawn and then sun up after a while, and he would be hungry, but that would be tomorrow. We're still at this, it's not the free fall of the grapevine, but we're at a still moment. But that would be tomorrow, and now he was only cold, and walking would cure that. Now the cure for the boy. Get up and now move on your own. Walking would cure that. His breathing was easier now, and he decided to get up and go on. He decided. And then he found that he had been asleep because he knew it was almost dawn. Now he knows something, too. He used to not know where the road was. He didn't know what time it was. Now he's moving on his own. He knows something. The night almost over. He could tell that from the whippoorwills. Because there is a death here, right? His dad's death and the death of the terror and fear. And it's a liberating death. They were everywhere now among the dark trees below him. Constant and inflectioned and ceaseless. So that as the instant for giving over to the day birds drew nearer and nearer, there was no interval at all between them. The passage from darkness of night through the whippoorwills into the birds of day, there's no interval at all between these things. He got up. He was a little stiff, but walking would cure that too, as it would the cold, and soon there would be the sun. He went on down the hill toward the dark woods. So this is how the Divine Comedy begins, isn't it? Down the hill and into the dark woods. And how did I get here? Toward the dark woods within which the liquid silver voices of the birds called unceasing, the rapid and urgent beating of the urgent and choiring heart of the late spring night. Not the early summer, as it was early, late spring. And he did not look back. So he's an Orpheus who succeeds. He's reunited with something, but it's not Eurydice, right? In some sense, what I'm hoping to say, I think I've already said.
What's your gloss on choiring?
Choiring, yeah. Well, it's like it's CHOIR, choiring, I think, but it's meant to look like needy, requiring. Is what I'm thinking. Urgent and choiring heart of the late spring. So it's his. I would even think of Psalm, not Psalm 73, Sonnet 73. Sorry, but in me you see it's the ruined choirs spelt this way often, right? It's the old word for the monastic choir, so it's also that's sort of an autumn thing. But yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting word, and the Malbrook reference also weird. When that little episode of like now we get the dad's actual. It's like Hightower's grandfather in Life in August. What really happened is he was shot in the butt while stealing chickens. Not that he would, so it's which is right at the end of Life in August. I mean, second to last chapter, where we get Hightower's real story. So there's it's a deeply tragic and painful and abusive and frightening story. But it seems to me the goal of the writing is to lead us to a deep and extremely beautiful and for the reader a kind of joyful sense of restoration and calm and one even wonders about, I mean, sort of the best thing that could happen to Abner somehow. It's not the story of the father and the old kind of I fight for no man, I'm a law to myself, the damnation of that. And he's going to walk off and start get a job in the mansion, and next thing he's the bourgeois. Right? I don't think that it's that like this sort of dark sense of mere lostness there. But I wonder. It's an interesting story. It's not just freedom from blood, I think, but like he's now. I don't know, sort of nor is it just a transfusion, It's like a cleaned up somehow.
It's so mysterious that this boy is so different from that older brother.
And the sisters.
Who
Who are
just
just
goes
inert,
along
blind
with
creatures.
the father, totally
Yeah.
yields to the father's will
Yeah.
without really questioning
Yeah.
it.
And I think it's sort of that, like the mother breaks in. What happened to the older boy, she doesn't want to happen to the little boy. And that seems it's so important that the older brother is so subtly there. And the twin sisters, who at least are materially human beings, they take up the space using flesh like a human being does, but they're kind of otherwise just bovine, and they play along also with the father cleaning. Surely they know he's ruining that rug, right? But the question I started with, that even higher question is there some kind of higher piety that's been achieved? You would think of having one's own father killed as an impious act, but I remember it as my first encounter with Socrates as an undergraduate, though I hadn't already read The Republic in my very strange high school experience. But the Euthyphro, the young priest who is taking his father to court, and Socrates interrogates him about, well, that seems like a very impious thing to do, but you're an expert in piety, aren't you? You're a priest. And he's like, well, my father is a murderer or whatever. And it's sort of debate, and he leaves the priest very puzzled about the nature of what's just. Is it just because the gods like it, or do the gods like it because it's just? And I feel like in its own way, the story too, it's that's what I got into with my students in the half a class we had to talk about the story. It was 40 minutes we spent on it. Is it a good thing or a bad thing the boy did? And they usually feel that it's the right thing because they're all very law-abiding people. But I say, well, his father doesn't end up dead in all this. It's a very impious thing to do, isn't it? I mean, it's an interesting little piece.
Isn't it important that the father, the Sardi can predict that his father may get shot.
Yeah.
But he certainly is not the one pulling the
Oh,
trigger.
yeah.
He's bringing truth to the situation. He's informing Despain, and then Despain can decide whether to be a killer or not.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that he really does
Cogitate.
think about the possibility of getting shot.
Yeah. He just goes to Despain because he's looking for something to help cure.
Well, he's operating in such a reduced way, as you say.
Yeah.
He can meet even with respect to his own intellect.
Yeah.
Which to call it intellect is a bit hyperbolic at
Yeah.
this point.
Yeah.
I like how at the end, as you were pointing out, as he moves from being kind of the gun pap to being able to refer to his father as a father, and then even my father, and start to make decisions. It really does seem as if he's had the can, the top of the can just kind of popped off, and Faulkner must think that his natural state is more fluent and more upward leaning, and just once you get rid of the pressure keeping him down, he rises kind of like a Pegasus or like a bird or an angel or something that's moving upward. Do you think the father is grooming him to be like himself, or that the father is putting him in a condition where he has to make a decision about which direction he's going to go?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would sort of say both. I mean, I think that my feeling is that the father is forcing him, trying to get the boy into a position where the boy will make the decision to stick with the blood. He says, if you don't stick with the blood, then none will stick with you. There's no other way to find a life in this world than for us to stick with each other. Which, and that's the moment, that's that moment where Sardi, the boy, says, it's the first time Dad ever explained why he hit me. There's an important lesson in it, and we got to stick together. I mean, it's not mere cruelty. So I don't like to think of Abner as a kind of psychopath who is abusing the boy to produce a kind of minion, but that I mean he's that poorest of the poor left over after the war, who he didn't really fight in exactly, and he has this sort of spirit, and he's trying to create a little world, but for him the world is refusing to keep having such a world alongside its orderly world.
You often see this with, if you think about abusive parents, it's like the family is just an extension of him.
Yeah.
They don't have any personhood of their own. He has absolutely no concern for the wife or the family or the boys, or they're just extensions of him that become instruments. And so he's got this idea, you got to stick to your blood, you got to have fidelity to your family. But I mean, he's entirely selfish.
Yeah.
And they're just extensions of him.
But then, is it that we say that in effect the boy, by doing what he's done, has actually done just what his father would do, but it's not barn burning? It looks like something different.
Well, yeah, I mean, to intervene, to stop the father's on a destructive downward spiral. Yeah. To try to intervene in that would be an act of love for the father.
Yeah, but it's also sort of doing your own thing. You're not following Dad. You're doing what Dad really does, which is respect no authority. I don't think that, what I'm saying now is not what I think is going on there, but.
This Haman love crayon,
So is there a sense in which we need to ask and don't really know about the meaning of the house for Sardi? Yeah. What exactly does that mean? Does he believe that that's going to protect, that there's no gun, that Despain doesn't need a gun, right, because of the power of the house or the statue, or something like that.
In the face of that power, I mean, he's super impressed by it, knowing, wow, well, we finally have something substantial here. But he says, the stiff and implacable limp of the figure which was not dwarfed by the house, he caught there. And so from the very perspective of the child, right, how he sees it, my father is as big and as stable and powerful as that mansion. So, and that comes right after he sees and he thinks and he's like, well, dreaming and maybe, but in actuality, he looks and goes, no.
Yeah, I think it's important with the vision of the house to get the undwarfed vision of the father. Such a strange, interesting passage. It's like he's sort of condensed down that there is nothing, like the fact that other things are bigger doesn't seem to matter because he's so absolute in himself.
The boy lived such a dislocated life. Yeah. That when you see that mansion and
which is the first
and the yard, and and it's not about wealth, it's about like the stability, and I think also the beauty.
And he sees the lady
and the order.
And the lady. It says it's like maybe the first time he saw one, she comes out and she's got her sleeves up
and
with
the
flower.
dignity of it. That I think that's what motivates him to take this risk. It's because he's had a vision of something higher.
Yeah. Does he see it as a risk, do you think? Or is it almost something that's,
Well, he's acting in desperation. I don't know what is going through his head.
or hope? There's hope there, isn't there, when he sees that house?
Yeah.
I thought it was like a duty. He said, at least before you send a nigger to warn them. So there
Yeah.
should be some kind of warning given, I think
Yeah.
is what he's saying. It's because, and after he says that, it's when the brother says, well, you gotta tie him
Yeah,
up. He's
yeah.
gonna go warn him. So, I think maybe there's a sense of justice.
Some kind of justice or duty is kind of,
Yeah.
without, but yeah, again, the boy, like so many characters in Faulkner, like doesn't have any terms for describing this. I feel that what I was thinking is like, so at the end, it's not just despair, it's just grief and despair, it's just that now. But grief seems to me very important alongside the despair, because if it's just despair, there's really no grief left. That's the cold and dead, but the grief is a warm and living pain feeling. And so I feel like that's sort of like, it's,
you can have sumptuous, well, Dickinson thinks you can have sumptuous despair, but
yeah,
I don't think of despair as all that expressive.
Yeah.
Grief
very,
can be very savored almost,
Yeah.
and be expressed meaningfully. And I see at the end of this story, I put a little more pressure on quiring.
yeah,
It's usually not a gerund or
yeah,
something that's more like a verb, but acquire spelled this way is a publishing term. It's a unit
Oh,
of
yeah,
4
yeah.
pages that have been
Yeah.
made into an octavo, and so there's the relationship between the 4 chambers of the heart and the 4-ness of the pieces of page, but I think it kind of implies that the heart, once it is freed and is not completely dumbed down, becomes something that becomes more and more nuanced and legible to itself, and something that gets inscribed with a history that can grow and swell, and it's all just